Hey everybody, TacticAngel back on the PlayStation 5 to take a look at another premium ship in World of Warships Legends. This time we'll be looking at USS Laffey, a Tier 8 premium American destroyer. For this review, I'll start with some history, move into analysis, discuss commanders, then run down the stats with you. Then we'll finish off with some gameplay. If you want to skip around, you should see some time codes in the description to help you out. Both DD-459 and DD-724 were named for Bartlett Laffey, an Irish-born enlisted sailor who received the Medal of Honor for manning a gun under withering fire at Yazoo, Mississippi during the American Civil War. Ordinarily an obscure enough figure that only one ship would have borne his name, this was World War II. America was building destroyers like it was going out of style, and you can be the judge about whether the second ship was also named after Bartlett Laffey, or if this is just another entry into the US Navy's psychological game with Japan, which made it seem like they could never really sink an American ship. They'd either get rebuilt or replaced faster than they could be sunk. In any case, the first USS Laffey was present at the Battle of Guadalcanal. On the night of November 13th, she was sitting at the head of a column of 8 US destroyers and 5 cruisers when Japanese battleship VIII in Kirishima, 1 cruiser and 11 destroyers, appeared on radar. Determined not to lose the US footing on the island, the US Navy engaged in one of the more desperate, brutal, and devastating losses it would receive in the early war. The battle is probably most famous for the loss of the USS Atlanta and Juneau, including the notable deaths of Admiral Norman Scott and the Sullivan brothers, respectively. But Laffey also performed bravely, charging into within 6 meters of the VIII and raking its deck with everything it could muster. These were the sorts of ranges where AA guns were absolutely used to target people, and in this case, it is attributed that this sort of fire injured Admiral Hiroaki Abe and killed his chief of staff. Laffey would take a 14-inch shell from VIII, which would also not survive the battle, before finally the destroyer was finished off by a torpedo from the Japanese ship Yukikaze. The wreck of the original Laffey is one of the dozens of ships that give Iron Bottom Sound its name, and so we come to USS Laffey DD-724. By hull number, she was the 32nd of 68 ships in the Sumner class, laid down in June 1943. She was launched later in November of that same year and commissioned into service in February 1944. She was actually the 6th Sumner to enter service, less than 2 weeks after Sumner herself. This sort of incredible construction rate was possible because Sumner only kind of was a half-new design. This is effectively a Fletcher hull, and on top of the 58 of these that they would make, the United States was well on its way to delivering 175 Fletchers, so shipbuilders had a lot of practice building these tin cans. Sumner's design was actually the realization of what the Navy designers had hoped the Fletchers could be at the beginning, maximizing forward firepower for weight with 2 turrets on the bow and 1 on the stern. That was a bit too revolutionary in 1939, a bit too reliant on automated loading systems for the interwar Navy to throw its support behind. Not to mention, at the time, a bit too heavy. Though these turrets may look very, very similar to turrets you'd find on American battleships, like the Iowa pictured here, or as the main battery for the Atlanta-class light cruisers, there are actually 3 different, very closely related turrets that have several sub-variations, and the one the Sumners are using is the Mark 38, which is more than 6 tons lighter than the Mark 29 turrets found on Atlanta, and dozens of tons lighter than battleship secondaries. A lot of this weight difference can be owed to the thickness of the turret armor. Though they might look the same on the outside, the Mark 38 here is just sporting 1/8 of an inch, which broadly speaking keeps the crew dry and provides cover from small arms, shrapnel, and dampens blasts, but it won't stop much more than that. That will come up later, but entering the war in February 1944, that meant that Laffey's first big engagement, after escorting a convoy on her way across the Atlantic, was going to be the Battle of Normandy. She'd start by shelling positions at Utah Beach, and days later help drive off E-boats that torpedoed USS Nelson, not the battleship. She'd come under fire at Cherbourg as part of the 2nd Bombardment Group, and take her first hit, a shell that bounced off the ocean and failed to detonate against her hull. With the need for naval units quickly evaporating near Europe, Laffey was sent to the Pacific, She'd join up with the Fast Carrier Task Force to act as part of the screen against submarine attack and contribute to the outer AA bubble for the fleet. This is what she'd spend most of her time doing, though she did get occasion to rotate into shore bombardment roles in support of landings at Ormoc, Lindoro, and Luzon, all pretty typical of what any destroyer would be doing late in the Pacific campaign. A bit less typical, on April 15, 1945, Laffey was assigned to Radar Picket Station 1, around 30 miles north of Okinawa. That's approximately here on a map, and the significance of this is that she was the closest U.S. surface vessel to the Japanese mainland. That means she'd also be the first ship that Japanese aviators could spot if they flew down from Japan. But equally so, Laffey was there to provide radar intel to the rest of the fleet, which would provide early warning against pending attacks. This was a task so important that around this time the US Navy started building Gearing-class destroyers with no torpedo tubes specialized for this very role. A total of 101 destroyers would rotate through radar picket duty in World War II. 10 were lost, another 32 damaged by kamikaze attacks. So what I'm trying to say here is that this is one of the more exciting or perilously dangerous places to be assigned, and though Laffey wouldn't know the war's overall stats, she was taking up a position that USS Cassiniung had been in just 3 days earlier, where she was also damaged by a kamikaze. I've set a lot of this up to explain the context, the real reason that Laffey is famous, and why she is called the ship that would not die. There are entire videos dedicated to the events that happened the following morning, but to put it briefly, shortly after 8 a.m., Laffey was spotted by a Japanese Val that dropped its bomb and left thanks to the power of kinetic persuasion. It did, however, have more than 50 friends, and in the hour and a half that followed, Laffey would start out all by her lonesome in the far north of the fleet without air cover. She'd splash 7 planes before being hit by 2, and I mean hit by the plane itself. She'd take a bomb hit next, jamming her rudder for the remainder of the engagement. By this point, Marine and Navy air cover were arriving to help drive off the swarming Japanese aircraft that had been trying to take out this one destroyer. By the end of the day, though, Laffey had been hit by an incredible 6 kamikaze attacks, was hit by a total of 4 bombs with several near misses, killing in total 32 members of her crew and wounding another 71. Damage to the ship was too extensive to repair in the field, and she'd get towed to Saipan and eventually make her way back to Tacoma, Washington in May. Repairs to rebuild the back half of Laffey began actually 4 days after the unconditional surrender of Japan. After her repairs, she'd be in service for a few years, during which she scored an accidental against the subchaser, PC-815, in a collision during heavy fog, and was an observation ship at Bikini Atoll for the atomic bomb tests before being placed into the reserve at the end of June 1947. She was reactivated for the Korean War, screening carrier Antietam and Valley Forge, and participating in the blockade of Wonsan. She'd sail for the Mediterranean to support U.S. interests during the Suez Crisis and assisted a British passenger ship Dara, which had an explosion aboard causing a fire. 1962, she'd go in for her FRAM 2 update, which is the Fleet Rehabilitation and Modernization Program, and that's when she'd received numerous upgraded systems like sonar and new radar, and more conspicuously, the hangar and flight deck, which don't look totally awful and I don't hate it. I don't know why you would ask. This is intended for the operation of the Gyrodyne QH-50 anti-submarine drone. You will also note the presence of 2 wing launchers for 3 torpedoes each, and these are for launching the Mark 44 acoustic homing torpedo. Both the drone and these torpedoes would be key to her role in the fleet as primarily an anti-submarine warfare vessel until March 1975, when she was decommissioned. Laffey was the last of the Sumners taken out of service with the U.S. Navy. Several others would go on to serve into the 21st century with various countries, and at least at this point, she is believed to be the last ship for class. That sketchy language is because we don't know what Iran has done with theirs. She was declared a National Historic Landmark in 1986 and can be visited at Patriots Point at Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. As far as Laffey in game, she's the first American premium destroyer at the tier, though she is the same class as Sumner. For those of you who are expecting a pretty predictable experience, that's going to be profoundly yes for some of you and profoundly no for people who don't play the Sumner at all like I do, unless you're occasionally pleasantly surprised to be alive. Really, what the Laffey is good at is what America does best. Guns! Lots of little ones on a fairly agile platform. They're not always the best in terms of out-and-out DPM, but they tend to be towards the top of the heap with good maneuverability and responsive turrets. In Laffey's case too, as long as you don't drive face first into death, you're going to be able to recover a lot of HP between fights, which can make you a contender for some of the highest effective HP for any destroyer that you can face. Those are the biggest two reasons that this ship is going to appeal to people, but since I usually put a third, it's both historically fitting and at least simultaneously useful that Laffey has decent AA for a destroyer, like other US Navy boats, as well as defensive fire AA. Downsides is that you kind of get what you get in terms of speed. Laffey isn't very fast, and she doesn't come with the speed boost, so it ain't getting any better. In terms of competitive play, a lot of people will prefer to play a ship with more utility. You know, something like the constant power creep of ever more sonar and radar on DDs, especially in places like Tier 8, which is where you're going to be doing your suffering if you prefer to play this ship. The other obvious issue is that the torpedoes are not very good, but you do have to pay the piper somewhere along the way, and in this case it comes with modest range, average speed, and unimpressive damage. And it's really the state of the torpedoes that is probably going to make or break this ship for you. If you think the chief purpose of a destroyer is a danger pylon distributor, then this ship is going to strike you as not very good. It's also possible that if you're married to eating up a destroyer slot to do exclusively Khabarov's crap, that this is probably not that great either. But if your one goal in a little boat is to get in there, win DD duels, and cap bases, then Laffey's a contender. And if you ever thought you'd rather play USS Kidd at Tier 8 rather than any of the garbage that is found there, well then I imagine USS Laffey is going to be Cloud 9 for you. When we come to commanders, William Halsey is probably going to be a lot of people's first and best choice. Because look, it's Bull Halsey, and he's got a lot of ability to make your guns work even better. A bit of a warning in terms of mortar, or your base trait, outside of certain special game modes, 5-inch AP and HE are both going to struggle with penetration against a lot of things at this tier. So what that does mean in terms of Halsey on this ship, the only real creativity in your build is going to be what you want your inspirations to be, your equipment, and then just a couple of your slots, because you can't really go wrong juicing your guns on a gunboat. Though normally a question of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, Burke does have access to Rather Be Torching. This is usually not a huge deal since US destroyers have better things to do typically than sit and smoke, desperately trying to roll a 20, particularly since they get only 2 smokes. Normally. With more smokes, there's actually more of an argument that this sometimes makes sense, and the extra 3% that goes along with fast firing, accurate guns can make this a decent fire starter. He allows you to do that while still keeping your engine going with quick fix, so there's really very few downsides here either. You can run this with Gleaves, and if you do, you can get your torpedoes up to a pretty usable 10-kilometer-ish range. This is going to give you a much more useful torpedo range, and you won't be a bad gunfighter in spite of these choices, but this is a lot like Michael Jordan playing baseball. I'm sure he's a better baseball player than most of us, but at what price? Well, obviously a lifetime of LeBron fans trying desperately to convince you to ignore reality. Or I guess in game terms, the ability to efficiently hunt destroyers and secure ring after ring after ring, I mean cap after cap, and really win the game for your team. There is also the base commander, Dewey, and while I will say that the Boss Dewey build still does work on this, you're doing it entirely for that extra super heal and faster reloads on all of your consumables. That might actually make him a better choice for sitting in smoke and trying to start fires with Burn It Down and a better recharge time, but you're losing RPF and the ability to keep your very delicate moving bits moving, so it's always a bit of a trade-off. Then we'll be talking about stats. They're still bugged, but everything you should see on screen is the base statistics as far as the game thinks they are, at least right now. As for survivability, the 18,500 hit points you start with is not incredible. It's 500 more than Sumner, but still about 2,000 less than normal. That said, most of the real potent gunships tend to have lower HP, if only to give the other ships some sort of chance. And if you don't immediately throw your life away, your effective HP is actually quite a bit higher than this. 13mm superstructure is sturdy by DD standards, 20mm hull is normal for tier 8, but neither of these numbers are likely to make any real difference if people are shooting HE at you, and nears no difference with AP either. Laffey comes with the same 3x2 arrangement of 127mm turrets. Their range is 11.2, which is 300 more than Sumner, and it trades that for 200 less damage with both HE and AP shells. Otherwise, these should feel like the 5-inch guns that you see on most American destroyers, which means they're good in an HE destroyer fight and struggle to pen both ways with only a 5% fire chance. That makes them not good fire starters, and they're even less consistent than that. But outside of the 2 or 3 things that you know you shouldn't fight, then these are always good guns. For torpedoes, she has 2 quintuple launchers, just like Sumner, but all of the stats here are different otherwise. Well, except speed. Both destroyers start with an average 66 knots, but the main thing you'll notice here is the 8-kilometer range. This is effectively half of what is on Sumner, and the only thing that makes up for that is 5-second faster reload. At 140 seconds, it's still pretty slow, and you also do less damage with 16,800, we'll call it. But overall, this is not an ideal torpedo boat. AA on Laffey appears surprisingly good, but this is likely the new UI that has no idea what's going on. The game gives this the same 52 rating that you'll find on Sumner, and currently shows this has DPS of 271. The same 52 rating on Sumner gives it 136, so my guess is that it's probably a lot closer to 136. This still makes you above average from the get-go, and you do have a trick that we'll talk about a little later. Basically, I just caution against thinking this is as good as it appears here. At least from my experience, there are some times when you may want to turn off your AA, if only not to tip off the carrier as to your location, since you have about 1.5 additional kilometers of AA range versus air detectability. The maneuverability on paper is typical of the Sumner. That means she's more than a knot slower than most destroyers, but makes up for it in terms of close quarters battles by both having an excellent turning circle, 620 meters, and the best in tier rudder shift. Unlike Sumner though, we won't be seeing an engine boost, so she's always going to be this slow, even in those moments where you'd prefer her to be faster. Concealment for Laffey is not great. This unmodified 7.1 kilometer range is 100 meters worse than Sumner, which is also the average. She gets the same disadvantage from air, and 2.6 kilometer smoke firing penalty is the same as pretty much every other American 5-inch destroyer. Your consumable selection, though, is different and going to make or break this ship for you. You start with your standard destroyer repair party. After that comes the best part of the ship, the heal. No, super heal. 277 for 20 seconds is 1.5% per second. For comparison, this is the same kind of super heal that you see on Luchon. For better or worse, the smoke on Laffey is unique. You get an unlimited number of them. Of course, unlimited would really be if the game went on literally forever. The 120-second reload is going to limit that somewhat. But this is a much easier smoke to pop to get yourself out of trouble or to take a few moments to just farm some damage and then move on. It doesn't last quite as long, 15-second dispersion and 60 seconds on the duration. So if you're trying to camp in this thing for some reason, you're going to have about 45 seconds between uses. Now, we may not know exactly what the AA is on this ship, but whatever it is, it's going to get a 400% boost when you press this button. You've got 3 charges of it. The only downside is the relatively short duration. So a really wise carrier player can largely tank this with evasive maneuvers or by flying away from it for a bit, but it is a reasonable emotional support consumable for a short period of time. All right, and at long last, we'll get to some gameplay. We're going to be on Crash Zone. I am, of course, going to throw my commander up on the screen real quick. We've got Bull Halsey, and you will see that I'm using Sims as an inspiration for extra HP. That is going to be important for HP recovery because we have the heal. And we also have this Abraham Lincoln looking fella. He's apparently the Spaniard Nunez. he's going to give us a little bit more speed and most of the stealth that we would get from choosing a stealth commander. So we are a little bit less stealthy even than we would normally be if we'd chosen the same sort of thing that I usually run on Sumner, but whatever. Other than that, we're going to be doing typical gunboat things. You can see faster reloads, a little bit more stealth, and a little bit more smoke. So nothing special. This is pretty standard stuff other than the presence of that new commander. As we start off the game, we're heading over towards A. I will say that I have previously checked the map, but I remember somewhere along the way that I should probably show that it's a good idea to do that, just to see what's in the mix against us. We do have one German destroyer, and we have a Fletcher as well. Now, I will say that I struggle sometimes to understand the difference between Z number and Z number. So I just assume that they all have sonar. Yeah, that's what I do. That's pretty much what I do. I assume they all have sonar. Now we're kind of following our RPF line here at the top. That is telling us where the nearest ship is and if they're being super aggressive, which is the worst thing that I want them to do because we're most of the way towards capping the base. Then maybe they'll run into those torpedoes. At this point, I don't rightly care. I got my cap. I'm happy to go to the next cap. We can see clearly that there is a destroyer in the middle. Up. And he just became the closest ship to me. This is probably good news because Fletcher is a ship that has no more utility than I do, but has one less gun. My wild maneuvering here is just in case he decided to shoot torpedoes at me sometime after he was spotted, but before then. Also, if he just shot them now, then chances are pretty good that they would also be off. And you can see immediately we've lost some hit points. A pretty good chunk of it, and we're going to be able to take back about a quarter of our overall hit points. And that's really what Laffey's about. Getting in there and being able to mix it up and then recover. I'm delaying a little bit here because Fletcher has that premium American long-lasting smoke, and I obviously have my unlimited smokes at the ready. But, you know, if you're left a gift, you know, you can use it sometimes. So in this case, we're just shooting a whole bunch. We're aiming high because basically the only part of the Bismarck that we can actually pen is the superstructure. Getting one or two fires on this thing will be pretty nice. But, you know, it's a 5% chance, and then there's the fire percentage reduction or resistance, however you want to call it, that's going to make it actually about half of what you'd expect it to be. And basically, these are long odds for this ship starting a lot of fires with any sort of consistency. And that's one of the reasons why, if you do decide to go with Arleigh Burke, then it actually makes a pretty big difference, a pretty noticeable difference in terms of the number of fires that you can actually get going on a ship. Just falling in some shells, we're happy to see that we got lucky there and actually set the Bismarck ablaze again. We're paying a little bit of attention still to that RPF. If you're really into killing other ships, it is kind of a must for running down other destroyers. We're going to go ahead, dump our torpedoes out there. If the Bismarck continues forward around that corner, then he's going to have a lot of stuff to deal with. And that's not that bad. 8 kilometers is pretty usable as long as you're not like really committed to the destroyer with torpedoes thing. Outside of some of the ships that have radar that you might want to actually torpedo, 8 kilometers is pretty workable. If you're trying to torpedo, you know, like a Baltimore or I don't know, one of the Russian ones, then yeah, it's gonna be pretty annoying. We're gonna get the attention of Wisconsin. Maybe she'll shoot her guns at us. We see somebody is.
Smoke screen set.
And there we have our smoke screen. Real short duration in terms of getting the smoke out there. Now we're gonna have about a minute, you can see in the upper left. And until that goes away, we're just gonna blaze away and see if we can't help with the DPM. That's mostly gonna be fires. He's gonna have 20 seconds here where he's immune to all of this crap. That's not great. We back up and make a little bit of a turn. The destroyer is obviously close enough that he can shoot torpedoes at us. So, I mean, he's German. He's not that far away.
Destroyed an enemy battleship.
And paying attention to our smoke screen time and also location, we're going to go ahead and silence those guns. Running through the middle of those two islands might appear to be a little bit of, I don't know, it might seem tempting. But if I go up there, I don't think I have any support, and I think I'm just going to get shot by a destroyer and a Martel. If I go around in front of the other ship with me, then I can at least spot torpedoes before he gets hit. He's a battleship. He'll probably appreciate it. We've also got our other destroyer out here. And it's not impossible that the destroyer is still in the direction that the RPF is showing. One would assume that what I'm detecting is the destroyer. So I'm going to ping the map. Östergötland seems to understand that that's what I'm trying to say. I do not like that this Plymouth started sailing towards me. Now, the one thing about the Plymouth is it does have excellent penetration. However, it cannot penetrate the hull of this ship. As long as I keep the nose directly faced towards it. Now, I will take this opportunity, since we are doing a review, to shoot AP at the side of this. It's only 6 kilometers away. You'd think if I could citadel it, I'd be able to do it. That is a ship that has its citadel above the waterline and also very poorly protected in terms of overall armor. So we didn't manage that, and here we have a little bit of a conundrum. We're gonna, use all of our brain power to dodge and stop shooting for a minute. We're obviously still getting shot because of this annoying radar, but that's life. We manage yet another assist and yet another dodge. We're using the bit of speed that we've got to kind of swing the tail around. We're not going to make this, it looks like. Take it right off the nose. That is unfortunate, but since we have been able to recover about 10,000 hit points, we've still got some, some gas left in the can. We are getting outspotted. That's not surprising considering I'm not all in on my concealment. He's also a German destroyer. He has pretty easy access to double and even triple concealment. I come around on him in part just to see if he embarrasses me, because it would be good for a review to show his utility. Again, I have no idea if he has sonar. I'll probably look that up and put it at the bottom of the screen here. But anyway, that will bring us neatly along to our closing thoughts on Laffey. I mean, I like American destroyers. She's good at winning those one-on-ones, and you saw we were trying not to get into like a 2-on-1 at any point. And in this case, we got lucky with the ships that were in the game. And that's going to work as long as she's not on the wrong side of some gimmick, because she doesn't have sonar or radar to flip the table. Instead, as the higher tier USN DDs have to learn, you do have to be able to break off and re-engage. Laffey is really quite excellent at that, because you can often come back with 5 or 10,000 more hit points, allowing you to sometimes lose 1 or 2 jousts before unhorsing your opponent. And at least if you're thinking about playing tier 8, you suffer least in destroyers when you do so, minus the prolific amount of radar out there. So other than being at the tier where fun goes to die, the only thing that I don't really like about Laffey is that this is more or less the same gimmick that I wanted for USS Johnston. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know what yours are down in the comments, and as always, I'll see you on the next one.